What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. About a week ago I released a build for the Devastator which kind of toyed with Quake and with Leap as well as with Endless Mass, and the idea was that we would use Endless Mass to pull the enemies together, leap on them, and then essentially dump some Quakes on them. It's a build that I enjoyed playing in vanilla, but it doesn't really play to the strengths of Seismic Commander, and if you really want to make a all killer no filler version of Bleed Quake, then you really gotta go with the 3 Quakes, you gotta go with the Leap, and you gotta go with something like Reflex Bullets so you can get all of that additional anomaly if you go bottom tree. And that is the build that we're gonna look at today. Now, as mentioned, this is probably the most OP setup, at least that I've been able to put together, that capitalizes on the additional bleed damage that you get from Seismic Commander and then adds additional statuses onto that, and then essentially just creates the situation where you ramp up your damage to as high as possible with the aid of Despair from Leap, and for instance the additional AP that you get from Reflect Bullets, as well as everything that comes along in the bottom tree and Mage's Rage and just all of that shit to essentially make the most powerful 3 Quakes that you can drop in a row. And as you can see in the footage in the background, even at the level that I'm at right now, and this effect will just continue on to essentially snowball the higher you level your gear, because the gaps, or rather the range at which you can increase your anomaly power, will just increase even more, and so therefore this will actually just retain its lethality and possibly get even a bit more disgusting. But this is able to do the terrible things to bosses and essentially almost one-tap them with another rotation following up to essentially take them down. Now, the benefit that you also have with this build is that you can quickly dart around the battlefield with Leap, so you can reposition yourself to gain the maximum amount of hits from your Quakes, which also come back on very low cooldown, and you're able to just unleash all of this additional damage to everything. Now, because this is in essence an update to that previous build that I made, I will be kind of like glossing over some of the, I would say, the basics when it comes to putting this build together when we look at the mods and everything. But in essence, it plays exactly the same way. So if there's anything that's unclear in this video, then obviously refer to the previous one. But I definitely think this would be, I would consider my farming setup for Devastator. I have a long way to go to get to 40 and also to farm out the other sets. Of course, I want to try a lot of different other combinations, but this is definitely something that allows you to very quickly finish expeditions, to very easily carry people, and most importantly to very easily kill the second arbiter, which is kind of like the farming point for most people, and where a lot of you will go to find upgrades for gear if you can't find it from Tiago or at other places. And when it comes to the build itself, we're going to do the usual thing that we do on this channel. We're going to look at the weapons first, we're going to look at the armor and the mods on there, then we're going to discuss the skills and the rotation that you have to do, but I kind of like already covered that in the build part that we just discussed before. We're definitely going to look at the class tree, we'll discuss the PAX choices, and I'll give you some advice on what you should target first when it comes to your Ascension points and those choices that you can make there. Now, specifically when it comes to the weapon, I wanted a ramp weapon, so if you don't have something with Mage's Rage on, Fortress can also help you. Anything that you can squeeze out some additional damage out of your AP, but absolutely Mage's Rage just really shines here and allows you to ramp up your anomaly so high that just makes those Quakes hit even harder. Now, what I do have on this weapon here, on this Absolute Zero, is I have 2 other statuses which I can put onto enemies, namely Ultimate Freezing Bullets, which obviously applies freeze, and then Stigmatize, which applies toxic. That allows me to then go into mods on my armor that allow me to deal more damage against those as well. So the decisions behind that will start making a little bit more sense once we get to that. Now, you don't really need a secondary, but I do tend to, with builds like this, especially where you tend to leap into combat, I do like to carry something that supports the reload meta. So this is perfect for that, the Guillotine with Radiation Splash, Moaning Winds, and Clip Combustion on, which gives you that one big nice reload rotation. So generally speaking, if you're playing this build solo, most stuff will die to that combo that you do. But if you, for instance, are carrying people or playing in a group, you might find that certain captains, elites, and especially bosses will be a little bit more chunkier, and this can definitely just help you to chip some of that damage off there. Now, I don't think the sidearm makes any difference here, but what you could also do here is exactly the same package as you have at the top here. If you're one of those people that likes to run around with sidearms, is you could have something like First Things First with a weapon with additional, what is it called? Additional armor piercing. and then you could essentially just ramp up your armor piercing even more, which this build also supports, and then you can gain more damage out of that by combining it with something like First Things First and Mage's Rage, for example. But when we get over to the armor itself, excuse the transmog, this is of course using Seismic Commando because we want to benefit off that additional bleed damage of 50% as much as possible. But on the headpiece, I have the Cranium of the Lost Creature. This has power assimilation on, giving us more anomaly power for every elite on the battlefield. We have Captain Antonia, which just again increases that damage profile against captains, elites, and bosses. And then we have Anomaly Echo on here, which just gives us another increase to our anomaly whenever we use a skill for 6 seconds. Our skill's on super low cooldown on this build, and in fact, due to the way how reflex bullets works is we can activate reflex bullets and immediately deactivate it to get the cooldown back, and also to proc this. So you essentially have this on tap depending on, you know, whenever you want to use it. But again, your earthquakes are on such low cooldown, so you'll also basically get it from there. So there's kind of like no reason while you're in combat not to have this up 24/7 is what I'm trying to say. Then on our chest piece, we have the first Seismic Commander here, and again, just pointing out what the set bonus here does. So this makes us deal 50% more damage against enemies that are afflicted by bleed. Now, almost all of our skills apply bleed, but more specifically, earthquakes apply bleed. So that's where you're really going to see some additional damage coming from this. Now, Euthanizer, as mentioned, my weapon causes toxic on enemies, so this allows us to capitalize on Euthanizer's 16% more damage against toxic, which is great. We have Earth Legacy on here because it increases the skill range of Earthquake by 60%. Now, by default, Quake doesn't really reach that far, but this helps you to cover large portions of the arena, and this is really handy, especially if you are trying to create these funnel zones where enemies are running at you. So you'll really start noticing just how far this can go on certain expeditions where naturally the expedition kind of like curves enemies towards you in a line, especially if we're playing monster expeditions, and it'll really just come in handy to just tag as many enemies as possible with one earthquake slam. Now, resistance is against the fortified. Wow, I'm really going fast now. No resistance against the fortified. This increases your resistance piercing by 100% of your armor piercing. And this, alongside another mod, which we'll look at just now, is essentially a way how we funnel our resistance and armor piercing into more AP. So that's an essential combo that should be no surprise to anybody that is familiar with playing anomaly power characters, because this is a very popular combo. On the pants, we have our second piece of Seismic, and here we have Tainted Blood, just again increasing that damage profile against bleed, so really great. We have extra Quake on here because you want 3 Quakes with this build. Does it work with 2 Quakes? Yeah, but you will really see some disgusting numbers and some massive rotations once you have access to 3 Quakes. We also have Virulent Compound on here because this is kind of like a mini Captain Hunter. Again, this says you deal 10% more damage against elites, captains, bosses, and all of that afflicted by toxic, which our gun does. So that's great. Also, once those guys explode, it makes a small little AoE and then actually spreads this effect over to other enemies as well, which is fantastic. Then on the gloves, we're actually using the Bannerlord's piece here. But essentially all I wanted additional damage to bleed, which we get from Bloody Boost. I wanted the second piece of that armor piercing, resistance piercing combo, which is Unstoppable Force here, which, as you can see here, increases your anomaly power by 15% of your resistance piercing. So the higher we can push our resistance piercing, the more damage we're going to get out, while the more anomaly power we're going to get, which translates into more raw power for us. Ground Crush on here is just a flat damage, base damage increase to our Earthquake. The Earthquakes hit pretty damn hard by themselves, but this is just a nice additional. So at the value that it is right now, for every rotation of 3 Earthquakes, I'm essentially stacking another 1,000,000 of damage on top of that, which is really great. Our third piece of Seismic gear is on our boots, and this has second Quake on there, so that's our 3 Quakes now complete. And then we have Arms and Anomaly on here, which essentially lets me get additional AP by critting enemies and essentially, you know, getting a little bit more AP out of that. Now, in any case, we have to shoot enemies in the head and crit them so that we can get the effect from Mage's Rage. So this is just an add-on to that and just gives us a little bit more AP to work with. Now, we also do have Despair on here, and this is the kind of, like, I would say, the real spicy part of the build, because without this, you will be seeing big Quakes, but this is insane due to the fact that once you leap onto a boss or a chunky enemy for 5 seconds, anything in the radius of where you land takes double the, as you can see, will receive 2 times more anomaly damage for 5 seconds. So if you're fast and if you can land that leap and you don't get knocked back or knocked over or something like that, you can go quake, 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 and you'll get all of that additional damage essentially coming from that. Now, as I think is fairly obvious by now, our 3 skills that we use in our rotation is Earthquake, which we have 3 of. We have Gravity Leap, which we can move around the battlefield with and apply Despair. And then we have Reflect Bullets, which is our protection ability, but this is really just a way for us to ramp up AP, which once we get to the class tree right now, you'll understand a little bit better. So the typical rotation, and if you go back to the beginning of the video where the build showcase was showing the fight against the Arbiter, you'll see that a typical rotation, if you want to deal the maximum amount of damage to one enemy or one big enemy, is simply just to start the fight by going Reflect Bullets as soon as you switch Reflect Bullets off. And what I mean by that is you can press Reflex Bullets to turn it on, and then you can press the button again to turn it off. And that counts as an activation of it, which gives you the additional AP due to what we have in the class tree. Plus, it comes back almost immediately off cooldown for you to be able to do that again at a later stage. But the point is, you do that, you activate Reflex Bullets, that gives you the AP boost, then you take your gun, headshot, 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 4 of them, so you get the nice boost from Mage's Rage. Now you've also got Arms and Anomaly procced as well, plus you've frozen the target and you've applied Toxic to the target. Then you leap onto the target. When you land on the target, you're going to apply Despair, and you look in the general direction of the enemy and you go slam, 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 and that's it. That's exactly what I did in the beginning part of that clip there, and you saw the damage that it was able to push out. Now, when we look at the class tree itself, the main aim of the game here is to try and get as much anomaly power as possible, to drive our cooldowns down as low as possible, and then also to pick up any kind of additional increases that we can see, either from ramp up effects like, for instance, what I was explaining with Reflect Bullets, also armor piercing and resistance piercing. So firstly, at the top here, we're just going to go 4 points in the top here so we can pick up these 2 armor breaker nodes, which gives us 20% armor piercing, which translates into resistance piercing, which translates into AP. Then we're going to go bottom tree, we're going to pick up anomaly power, we're going to get some cooldown reduction, we're going to get some more anomaly power, and we're going to get paladin. Now this is why we have Reflex Bullets, because every time when we activate Reflex Bullets, we get 45% additional anomaly power for 10 seconds. We're also going to go up and get just some cooldown reduction for Reflex Bullets in case we needed it. But more importantly, we want Strong Arm of the Anomaly, which says that when we use our melee, whether we hit straight or do a AoE slam, we increase our resistance piercing by 15% for each hit enemy for 10 seconds. This is another ramp up mechanic for us, and you'll notice when I spoke about the rotation, I didn't mention this. What you can do is, if something survives that first rotation, and while you're waiting for your leap to come off cooldown so you can apply Despair again, you can cycle in this rotation. So as soon as you finish your 3 quakes, you then AoE melee. That's going to give you some more resistance piercing, whether there's 1 enemy or 3 or 4. That's going to ramp you up a little bit more, and by then your quakes are off cooldown and you can slam, slam, slam again. What we have to remember is our earthquakes aren't super low cooldown. This is 4.3 seconds for every 3 that you use. So you're going to go 4.3 seconds, you're going to use 3, you're going to wait 4.3 seconds, and you're going to be good to go. That gives you that little window to do the melee or something like that. Perhaps go Reflex Bullets up to get the AP again, and then melee, and then go again with your quakes. And then by the time you're done with that rotation, you're going to be ready for a full stack rotation again with Gravity Leap. And that's basically what you do. You just move around the battlefield, repeating that rotation the whole time, and that's going to give you maximum pressure on the enemy and maximum damage. Now, continuing on with our class tree, again, we're going for resistance piercing, armor piercing, and anomaly whenever we can find it. So we're going down the line here, a little bit more cooldown reduction. We're definitely getting executioner, which just helps us to deal more damage to enemies, especially bosses and stuff that have big life pools. Once they get closer to the end of their life pool, about 30% of their HP, you'll deal 20% more damage. We're going to get some more anomaly power. We get some skill leech here. And we're going to get skill sentry, which says it increases your armor and your resistance by 20% for 10 seconds when your skills end. Now this can be anything. For instance, when your reflex bullets ends, this will apply. Now you'll see that we aren't really stopping to pick up any survivability. The only survivability we've picked up so far is skill leech and skilled sentry. But that's because the PAX choices we're going to look at just now actually make you impossible to be killed with this build. So Devastator by default is already a hyper chunky class and has a hard time, you know, dying. This will just essentially, you know, make you unkillable. We also get pure anomaly here, which increases our resistance piercing, and then of course we get Earth's heritage, which just gives us a flat 50% base damage increase to our earthquakes, which just really help us to hit really hard with those. The majority of your damage on this build is going to be coming from earthquake, and then secondly it's going to be coming from bleed. So then when we go over to the PAX tree, this is what I was talking about. So of course we want to go bottom tree because we are playing an anomaly based class. So we definitely pick up impact point. This just means that your seismic and kinetic skill damage is increased by another 30% of your anomaly. So this is just a nice flat increase over the top. This bonus 30%, right, is split among all damaged enemies. So if you hit one enemy, it takes the full 30. If you hit like 5 enemies, then, you know, like each of them takes 6% of the 30%. So then when we look at puncture, this is really good. So back in the day in vanilla, you actually had to use a mod to make your earthquakes cause bleed. With puncture, this just makes all of your seismic skills. So if you were using anything else like impale or tremor or so on, this would also make those cause bleed. But more importantly, this causes your earthquakes to cause bleed, which means you don't have to use that mod anymore. It also says though that your anomaly damage to enemies afflicted with bleed is increased by another 10%. So just more capitalizing on that bleed. Now this node here, Earthen Shell, is the reason why you can't die with this build. This says that damage dealt with skills is converted to shield. Now 2 of your abilities deal damage. Your leap deals a small amount of damage, damage. Your melee, so actually it's 3. Your melee also deals damage, and it's considered a skill, so this can also give you shield. But your earthquakes deal a fucking crap ton of damage, and that's gonna just be all converted into shield. So it's not uncommon for you to almost be on max shield the entire time when you're fighting with this build, especially due to the fact that your earthquakes come back so quickly, and you can actually space them out in a normal fight where you're just moving through trash and everything like that. You won't have to go quake, because one quake is usually enough to kill a batch of enemies. So you can be more sort of spacious with your quakes and figure out where you can hit the maximum amount of enemies. So quake, leap, quake, AoE melee, quake, and then you go on cooldown, and that entire time you're just boosting up your shields and you're keeping yourself topped up. Now we want to be getting upheaval and multi-strike, because that's really where you accentuate the damage coming from earthquake, and more importantly coming from bleed. Now what upheaval does is this says that enemies damaged by seismic skills, i.e. earthquake, become upheaved for 2 seconds. That means they store 10% of the damage received during this upheave time of 2 seconds, and then it releases it afterwards. Now in those 2 seconds, your next quake is going to hit, and as well, bleed ticks are going to be happening, toxic ticks are going to be happening, all of that. So all of that damage is stored up, or not all, 10%, sorry. If it was all, my god, it would be broken. 10% of that damage and is then released essentially after this upheave time. Now, multi-strike basically just in a way accentuates this effect. So this says that 30% of damage dealt by seismic skills is stored and added to your next seismic skill. This effect resets every time you release your stored damage. So this will mean like you'll have like a hit that stores on the next quake. The next quake is going to be hella hard. Then you're gonna be empty. You're gonna have to cycle it up again. So it's gonna go like small, hard, small, hard, small, hard the whole time, and that way you'll notice that in the rotation you'll see that some of your quakes, or every second quake, will hit a lot harder than the quake before it, basically. Then last but surely not least, when we get to the Ascension points, now I don't have a ton of points on here, but definitely because we are playing a AP focused class, and this is actually true even if you are playing firepower, is you generally want to be putting your first 10 points into anomaly damage. That's just because it's a flat damage increase on top, and so this is just a great way for you to just increase your overall threat, or rather damage dealing capability, not threat causing it. Threat doesn't matter shit. Then next up would be something like giving yourself 10% more anomaly power. Because we benefit from resistance and armor piercing on this build, that would also be smart decisions to pick up resistance piercing 10% as well as armor piercing 10%. If for some reason, I don't know why, but maybe you don't have all your PAX points yet because you're playing through the story mode, maybe you're struggling a little bit with survivability, you can of course pick up something like A good example would be skill leech, which will give you a little bit more life from when you use your earthquakes. Status power is actually going to make your bleeds tick for more damage as well, which is also great. You can drive your cooldowns down further by picking up cooldown reduction here. And also you can actually just make yourself deal more damage against elites or take less damage from elites over here. And last but not least, if you are really struggling with survivability, then there's of course a health, additional health you can pick up here, as well as additional armor. And that's it for the build and almost it for the video. Let me know in the comments down below if you have built your final version of Seismic Commander like this as well. If you prefer to use other skills, maybe you mix in Impale here instead of using something like Leap, for example, or maybe instead of using something like Reflect Bullets, maybe you prefer using Golem instead of Reflect Bullets, which is a perfect, you know, it's perfectly usable. There's nothing wrong with that if that's the sort of thing that you like. But for me, this is pretty much, I think I've exhausted what I wanted to do with Seismic Commander, specifically around Quake and that kind of playstyle. The issue though is, and I have a couple of other builds that I'm cooking as well, is that Seismic Commander is just so good compared to the other sets. And yes, I know Marshall is pretty good as well, and I've been goofing around with Bannerlord as well. But it's really impossible for me to imagine this exact setup working with another set except Seismic Commander. So it really feels like this playstyle really belongs well with this set. And that's why it's kind of like one that you want to have in your Devastator's repertoire, so you can sort of use it if you just want to go do some fast farming on bosses or anything like that. This is not to say though that there aren't any other sets that can kill just as fast. Of course, Boulder Dash is still in the game and also kills really, I mean, to say that Boulder Dash kills fast is an understatement. It kills instantly. So that's obviously an option still as well, but that will most likely get, you know, nerfed or fixed, rather is the right way to put it, because the way that Boulder Dash works right now isn't actually the way. But I digress. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. And until next video, fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.